The courtroom air was stale, recycling the tension between two women who hated each other with every fiber of their being. On the left sat Jenna, vibrant, young and smug, clutching a handwritten note she believed was her golden ticket to a $20 million empire. On the right sat Catherine, the grieving widow, silent as a statue, her hands resting on a single manila envelope. Jenna thought she had won. She had the texts, the photos, and the undeniable truth that the deceased husband loved her more. But she didn't know what was in that envelope. She didn't know that one single bank document dated 15 years prior was about to not only destroy her case, but reveal a secret so dark it would leave the judge gasping for air. This is the story of how arrogance lost a fortune, and how silence can be the loudest weapon of all. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean, it just made everything heavier. That was how Catherine Pembroke felt as she stood by the open grave of her husband, Richard. The wet earth smelled of decay and expensive lilies. At 55, Catherine was still a striking woman, though today her face was drawn, her blue eyes obscured behind oversized black sunglasses. She stood straight, her posture rigid, a habit formed from 3 decades of being the perfect corporate wife to Richard Pembroke, the titan of Pacific Northwest logistics. Richard had collapsed on the golf course 4 days ago, a massive coronary. He was dead before he hit the grass. He left behind a logistics empire, a portfolio of real estate that spanned 3 states, and as Catherine was painfully aware, a mess. The funeral at the private cemetery was supposed to be a dignified affair, only the inner circle. Richard's business partners, their lawyer David Reynolds, and a few distant cousins who were undoubtedly calculating their potential inheritance. The priest was midway through the final commendation, his voice fighting the rhythm of the falling rain against the umbrellas when the sound of an engine cut through the solemnity. It wasn't just any engine. It was the high-pitched, aggressive whine of a Porsche 911 GT3. Heads turned. David Reynolds, a man who had cleaned up Richard's legal spills for 20 years, stiffened beside Catherine. "Don't look," he whispered, stepping slightly in front of her. But Catherine didn't look away. She watched as the cherry-red sports car, a vehicle far too loud for a cemetery, screeched to a halt on the gravel path just yards from the burial site. The door swung open, and out stepped Jenna Miller. Jenna was 32, though she tried hard to pass for 25. She was dressed in black, but it wasn't mourning black. It was a cocktail dress, tight lace-trimmed with a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. She wore a veil that looked more like a fashion statement than a sign of grief. She was sobbing loud, theatrical, heaving sobs that felt performative to everyone, except perhaps herself. "Rick. Oh, Rick," Jenna wailed, stumbling over the wet grass in stiletto heels that sank into the mud. The priest paused. The silence that followed was excruciating. 2 security guards hired by David for this exact scenario moved to intercept her, but Jenna waved a manicured hand at them, flashing a diamond bracelet that caught the dull grey light. "Don't you touch me!" she screamed, her mascara already running. "I have a right to be here. I loved him. I was the only one who truly loved him." She pushed past the guards and threw herself toward the casket. Catherine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She watched the younger woman drape herself over the mahogany wood, her sobbing escalating into a scream. "You can't put him in the ground yet." "We weren't done. He promised me." Jenna looked up, locking eyes with Catherine. The sobbing stopped instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "You," she spat, pointing a shaking finger at the widow. "You cold, frigid witch. You killed him. The crowd gasped. A business partner. Thomas stepped forward. Miss Miller, this is neither the time nor the place. Shut up, Thomas. You knew, Jenna shouted, standing up and smoothing her dress. You all knew. Rick was leaving her. He told me last week. He was filing for divorce on Monday. He was going to marry me. I am the one who should be standing there, receiving the flag, not her. Catherine slowly removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry. She looked at Jenna with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. Jenna, Catherine said, her voice low, but carrying effortlessly through the rain. You are wearing the shoes I bought for my daughter's graduation. Richard gave them to you, didn't he? Jenna blinked, caught off guard. She looked down at her feet, then back up, sneering. He bought them for me, because he said I had the legs for them. He said you stopped caring about how you looked 10 years ago. He bought them with the joint Amex, Catherine said simply. I saw the statement this morning. Please finish your scene. It's getting cold. Jenna's face turned a violent shade of red. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. You think this is a joke? You think you're keeping the money? He wrote this, the night before he died. It's a holographic will. It says I get the house in Aspen. I get the liquidity. I get the terrifying amount of money you think is yours. David Reynolds stepped forward, his hand extended. Jenna, if that is a legal document, you need to submit it to the probate court. Waving it around at a funeral only makes you look unstable. Unstable? Jenna laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. I'm the only one here who's real. Richard hated you people. He hated the stiffness. He hated the pretense. She turned back to Catherine. He told me everything, Catherine. I know about the business trips that were just him sitting in a hotel room, drinking because he couldn't stand being in the same house as you. I made him happy. I deserve his fortune, and I'm going to take it. Every single penny. She leaned in close, whispering, so only Catherine could hear. I'm going to leave you destitute, Catherine. You'll be greeting customers at Walmart by the time I'm done with you. Jenna spun around, marching back to the Porsche. She revved the engine aggressively, spraying gravel onto the mourners as she peeled away. The priest, looking thoroughly shaken, cleared his throat. Shall we continue? Catherine nodded slowly. She placed a single white rose on the casket. As she bowed her head, David leaned in. She's going to be a problem, Catherine. If she really has a handwritten note, in this state, holographic wills are admissible if we can prove it's his handwriting. I know, Catherine said softly. We should settle. David advised, his voice hushed. Give her $1 million. Make her go away. A trial will drag Richard's name through the mud. She'll air every dirty laundry basket he ever filled. Catherine turned to her lawyer. For the first time that day, a small, ghostly smile touched her lips. Let her sue David, Catherine said. Let her drag it all out. Let her believe she's won. But why? David asked, bewildered. The publicity. Because, Catherine whispered, watching the hearse begin to lower the man she had been married to for 30 years. Richard wasn't the man she thought he was, and neither am I. 2 weeks after the funeral, the Pembroke estate was in chaos. Catherine sat in the study of the sprawling Victorian mansion overlooking the Puget Sound. The room smelled of Richard's cigar smoke and leather. She was going through boxes of paperwork. Richard had been sloppy in his final years, careless. The doorbell rang. The housekeeper, Maria, appeared in the doorway a moment later, looking pale. "Ma'am," Maria said, "it's a process server." Catherine didn't look up from the ledger she was reading. "Let him in, Maria." A young man, looking terrified to be stepping onto such expensive rugs with muddy boots, shuffled in. He handed Catherine a thick envelope. "Served," he mumbled, and practically ran out of the house. Catherine opened the packet. It was a lawsuit. Jenna Miller versus the estate of Richard Pembroke. She scanned the documents. Jenna hadn't hired a strip mall lawyer. She had hired Simon Callahan. Catherine knew the name. Callahan was a pit bull. He specialized in high-conflict divorces and palimony suits. He was known for destroying reputations to force settlements. The claims were bold one. Constructive trust, Jenna claimed she and Richard had lived as husband and wife, in all but name, for 5 years. 2. Promissory estoppel, she claimed she had quit her career as a flight attendant because Richard promised to support her for life. 3. The holographic will. A copy was attached. Catherine put on her reading glasses and looked at the copy of the handwritten note. "My dearest Jess, I can't stand another day without you. I'm leaving her. I promise you everything I have is yours. The Aspen house, the accounts, the portfolio. I'm writing this so you know I mean it. If anything happens to me, this is my will. You are my beneficiary. Love, Rick." It was dated 3 days before he died, and it was undeniably Richard's handwriting. The chaotic loops of the Y, the sharp cross of the T. Catherine picked up the phone and dialed David Reynolds. "She filed," Catherine said. "I saw it electronically." David replied, his voice tense. "Callahan is playing hardball, Catherine. He's filed a motion to freeze the estate's assets. He's claiming you might dissipate the funds to spite her. The judge granted a temporary injunction. She froze my accounts. The estate accounts. You have your personal checking, but the bulk of the money. It's locked down until the preliminary hearing. Catherine, listen to me. Callahan called me this morning. They want $20 million and the Aspen property. If we agree, they drop the suit." "No," Catherine said. "Catherine, be reasonable," David pleaded. "The note is real. I had a handwriting expert look at the scan. It matches. If a jury sees that, they'll see a man in love who wanted to provide for his mistress. We could lose everything. The house you're sitting in. They could take that, too." I said, "No, David. I want to go to court." "Why are you doing this?" David snapped, losing his professional cool. "Is it pride? Because pride costs a hell of a lot more than $20 million. "It's not pride," Catherine said, standing up and walking to the window. The rain had started again. "It's accuracy. Richard was a liar, David. He lied to me for years. He lied to his partners. Do you really think he told the truth to a 32-year-old flight attendant? The note is Richard being Richard. Impulsive, dramatic, and ultimately meaningless," Catherine said. "I need you to come over, David. There's something you need to see. I found a box in the back of the safe. It was behind the bonds." "What is it?" "It's a bank document," Catherine said. "From a bank in Zurich. It's dated 20 years ago." Zurich. Richard didn't have Swiss accounts. He was terrified of the IRS. "That's what we all thought," Catherine said. "Come over and bring a scanner. We're going to need to send this to Callahan eventually, but not yet. Let's let them think they have us cornered." The first time they met in court was for the asset freeze hearing. The courtroom was modern, devoid of the character of the old halls of justice, buzzing with the fluorescent hum of lights. Jenna sat beside Simon Callahan. Callahan was a short man with a booming voice and a suit that cost more than most cars. He looked confident. Jenna looked like the grieving widow she claimed to be, dressed more modestly today, in a navy suit clutching a crucifix. Catherine sat with David. She wore a cream-colored blazer and slacks. She looked like a CEO. "Your Honor," Callahan began addressing Judge Margaret Stone. "We have clear evidence of the decedent's intent. Mr. Pembroke had left the marital bed years ago. He was supporting my client entirely. He paid for her apartment, her car, her living expenses. He wrote a will, handwritten, yes, but valid under state law, given the sudden nature of his death, leaving her his fortune." Callahan paused for effect. "The widow Mrs. Pembroke is a woman scorned. We believe she is vindictive. We have affidavits from household staff stating that Mrs. Pembroke and the deceased had screaming matches about money. If the assets are not frozen, she will burn this estate to the ground rather than let my client have her fair share." Judge Stone looked over her glasses at the defense table. "Mr. Reynolds' response." David stood up. "Your Honor, the estate is complex. Mrs. Pembroke has bills to pay. Maintenance on the properties alone is $50,000 a month. Freezing the accounts cripples the business operations." "The business operations are secondary to justice," Callahan interrupted. "My client has no income. She gave up her career for that man." Jenna let out a soft sob, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Judge Stone sighed. "I'm going to uphold the freeze on the primary investment accounts. Mrs. Pembroke, you will be granted a stipend for essential maintenance and living expenses, but no major liquidations. We will set a date for the validity of the will hearing in 3 months." Jenna smiled through her tears. She leaned over to Callahan. "We got her." As the bailiff dismissed the court, Jenna walked past Catherine. She stopped, leaning in close. The smell of overly sweet perfume wafted over Catherine. "I'm going to take the house, Catherine," Jenna whispered. "I'm going to redecorate the master bedroom first. Get rid of that awful floral wallpaper." Catherine looked at her. Her expression wasn't angry. It was almost pitying. "Jenna," Catherine said softly, "did Richard ever tell you about the '98 merger?" Jenna frowned. "What, no? Why would I care about business?" "Because," Catherine said, gathering her purse, "that was the year Richard almost went to prison. He didn't because I bailed him out. You think you knew him because he bought you jewelry. You knew the man who spent money. You never met the man who had to make it. You're just jealous," Jenna sneered. "He loved me." "He loved how you looked at him," Catherine corrected. "He loved that you didn't ask questions. But now in this court, questions are all that matter." Catherine walked away, leaving Jenna standing in the aisle, confused but still arrogant. Outside the courtroom, David grabbed Catherine's arm. "That Zurich document. You need to tell me exactly what it means. If we use it, we might open a can of worms with the feds." "The feds can't touch Richard now," Catherine said. "And as for me, I signed nothing." "But what does the document say?" "Catherine." Catherine stopped on the courthouse steps, looking out at the city skyline. "It says that Richard Pembroke didn't own the fortune he was spending, David. It says that for the last 20 years, he's been managing money that wasn't his." David went pale. "Then whose is it?" Catherine smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. "That is what Jenna is going to find out the hard way." The conference room at Reynolds and Associates was glass-walled, offering a panoramic view of the rain-streaked city. But the atmosphere inside was claustrophobic. It was time for depositions. This was the phase of litigation where lawyers dug for dirt, hoping to find enough filth to force a settlement. Simon Callahan sat at the head of the table, his expensive fountain pen tapping rhythmically against a yellow legal pad. Beside him, Jenna Miller looked bored, scrolling through her phone. Catherine sat opposite them. She had brought a knitting bag. As the videographer set up the camera, she pulled out a ball of grey wool and began to knit. The rhythmic click-click of the needles seemed to irritate Callahan instantly. "Mrs. Pembroke," Callahan began, the camera's red light blinking on. "Are you aware that knitting is not typically done during a legal deposition?" "I find it helps me focus, Mr. Callahan," Catherine said, not looking up. "And since you bill by the hour, I assume this will take a while. Please proceed." Callahan narrowed his eyes. "State your name for the record." "Catherine Elizabeth Pembroke." "You were married to the deceased for 30 years, 31 years, 4 months. And would you describe that marriage as happy?" Catherine paused. The needles stopped for a fraction of a second. "I would describe it as a partnership, Mr. Callahan. Richard and I built a life. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. Stability is an asset." "Stability?" Callahan scoffed. "Is it stable when your husband buys a penthouse apartment for another woman? Is it stable when he spends his weekends in Cabo with Miss Miller while telling you he's at a logistics conference in Omaha?" "Richard had many hobbies," Catherine said dryly. "Some men golf, some men gamble. Richard collected admirers. It was expensive but manageable." Jenna slammed her hand on the table. "I wasn't a hobby. He loved me. He told me he couldn't stand to touch you." "Miss Miller," David Reynolds interjected calmly, "you are not being deposed. Please remain silent." Callahan smirked at Jenna, signaling her to calm down. He turned back to Catherine. "Let's talk about the finances. You claim the estate is insolvent without the frozen assets. Yet we have records of Richard spending nearly $50,000 a month on Miss Miller. Clearly the money was there." "Richard was very good at cash flow," Catherine said, resuming her knitting. "He was less good at net worth." "What does that mean?" "It means, Mr. Callahan, that living like a king and being a king are two very different things. Richard liked the trappings of wealth. He liked the cars, the women, the attention. But the foundation," she shook her head. "Sand. Are you denying the existence of the investment portfolio, the one valued at $22 million? I am not denying its existence. I am denying his ownership of it." Callahan laughed. "He's the only name on the accounts, Mrs. Pembroke. We checked. It's his money. And per his holographic, well, it's now Jenna's money." Catherine finally looked up. Her eyes were cold steel. "You checked the domestic accounts, Mr. Callahan. Did you check the source of the initial capital? Did you trace the wire transfers from 2005? Callahan hesitated. "We are still in discovery. But that's irrelevant. The money was in his name at the time of death. If a valet is driving a Ferrari when he dies of a heart attack behind the wheel, does the Ferrari belong to his heirs?" Catherine asked. "That's a ridiculous analogy." "Is it?" Catherine reached into her bag. She didn't pull out more wool. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't the Zurich document yet. It was something else. "This is a credit report for Richard Pembroke from 1998, the year before the logistics company truly took off. Read the score, Mr. Callahan." Callahan took the paper. He frowned. 420 bankruptcies. Richard was broke, Mr. Callahan. Destitute. He had gambled away his inheritance. He was facing fraud charges for writing bad checks. Jenna looked at the paper, then at Catherine. So he built himself back up. That makes him even more amazing. He was a self-made man. He didn't build himself back up, Catherine said quietly. He was bailed out. Someone paid off his debts. Someone put up the capital to start the logistics firm. Someone bought the first warehouse. Who? Callahan demanded. Me, Catherine said. Silence descended on the room. The only sound was the hum of the HVAC system. You, Jenna laughed incredulously. You were a housewife. You never worked a day in your life. I never worked for a salary, Catherine corrected. But my maiden name is distinctive, isn't it? Perhaps you didn't do your background check, Jenna. I was born Catherine Van Doren. David Reynolds watched the color drain from Callahan's face. The Van Dorens were old money, railroad money, the kind of money that didn't scream. It whispered, and buildings got named after it. I was disowned for marrying Richard, Catherine continued. My father knew he was a con artist, but I was young and I was in love. When my father died in 1998, I inherited a trust that Richard couldn't touch legally. But I let him manage it. I let him put his name on the company documents because his ego couldn't handle being an employee of his wife. She leaned forward. Every penny Richard spent on you, Jenna. Every dinner, every flight that Porsche parked outside. He was spending my inheritance. He was stealing from his wife to pay for his mistress. Jenna looked sick. She turned to Callahan. Is that true? Does that matter? Callahan recovered quickly. It doesn't matter, he declared, though his voice lacked its previous boom. If he commingled the funds, if he treated them as his own for 20 years, they became marital property. And as his share of the marital property, he can will them to whoever he wants. We'll argue commingling. We'll argue you gifted him the funds. You can argue that, Catherine said, packing away her knitting. But you'll lose. Because I didn't just give him the money. We signed a contract. A prenup? Callahan asked. We've seen the prenup. It's standard. Not a prenup, Catherine said, standing up. A loan agreement. A secured promissory note, callable upon demand or upon death. She walked to the door. Richard didn't own $20 million, Mr. Callahan. Richard owed me $20 million, plus interest. The revelation at the deposition sent shockwaves through Callahan's strategy, but he wasn't done. He was a fighter. He filed motions demanding the original loan agreement. He hired forensic accountants to prove that Catherine had effectively forgiven the loan by not enforcing it for 2 decades. Meanwhile, Jenna was unraveling. 3 weeks before the trial, she showed up at Catherine's house. She didn't have the Porsche this time. She arrived in an Uber. It was raining again. Catherine opened the door. She was surprised to see the younger woman looking so disheveled. Jenna's hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore no makeup. "Can I come in?" Jenna asked, her voice small. Catherine hesitated, then stepped aside. Briefly. They sat in the living room. Jenna didn't sit on the couch. She perched on the edge of a chair, clutching her purse. "Simon says you're lying," Jenna said. "He says the loan document is probably a forgery. He says you made it up after Richard died, to cut me out." "Simon is paid to say things like that," Catherine replied, pouring tea. She didn't offer any to Jenna. "Did you love him?" Jenna asked suddenly. "At the end, did you even like him?" Catherine looked at the portrait of Richard hanging over the fireplace. It was painted 10 years ago. He looked dashing confident, a lie in oil paint. "I loved the man I thought he could be," Catherine said. "Richard had moments of kindness. He was funny. He was charming. That's how he got people to trust him. That's how he got you." "He told me he was trapped," Jenna said, tears welling up. "He said you controlled everything, that you held the purse strings and treated him like a child." "Was he wrong?" Catherine asked. "He spent his life spending money he didn't earn. He needed a keeper. I was tired, Jenna. I was so tired of cleaning up his messes. The DU is he paid to make disappear. The bad investments, the gambling debts. He gambled. He lost $2 million in Macau 3 years ago. Who do you think wired the money to the casino so they wouldn't break his legs?" Catherine took a sip of tea. "Me." Jenna stared at the floor. "I'm pregnant." The cup clattered slightly as Catherine set it down. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. "I found out the week before he died," Jenna whispered. "That's why he wrote the note. That's why he was going to leave you. He wanted to be a father. He said he never got to be a real father to your children because he was too busy building the business." Catherine laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. "He wasn't busy building the business. He was busy chasing secretaries. He was a terrible father, Jenna. My son hasn't spoken to him in 5 years. My daughter only talks to him when she needs tuition money." "He would have been different with this baby," Jenna insisted, touching her stomach protectively. "This is his legacy. And that's why I can't back down. I need that money, for his child." Catherine looked at the young woman. She saw the desperation. She saw the delusion. And for a moment she felt a flicker of sympathy. But then she remembered the funeral, the scene, the humiliation. "If you are pregnant," Catherine said, her voice turning to ice, "then you have a problem, because Richard had a vasectomy in 2010. Jenna's head snapped up. "What, after our son was born, he didn't want any more mistakes? He had the procedure. I drove him to the clinic." "You're lying," Jenna breathed. He said we were trying." "He lied to you, Jenna. Just like he lied to me. Just like he lied to the bank. Just like he lied to everyone." Catherine stood up. "Get a paternity test, but don't come into my house and use a non-existent child as a bargaining chip." Jenna stood up, shaking. "It is his. I know it is. And when the DNA proves it, I won't just take half. I'll take it all. I'll sue you for emotional distress. I'll destroy you." She ran out of the house. Catherine watched her go. She picked up the phone and called David. "She's claiming she's pregnant," Catherine said. "Oh, God." David groaned. "That complicates things. If there's a biological heir—" "There isn't," Catherine said. "Get Richard's medical records from Dr. Evans. The vasectomy." "Okay. But Catherine, vasectomies can fail." "Not Richard's," Catherine said. "He was too vain. He went back for checks every year to make sure. He was terrified of being trapped by a woman like Jenna." "Okay, I'll get the records. But Callahan is moving to invalidate the loan agreement. He's found an expert who says the paper stock used for the agreement wasn't available in 1998. Catherine felt a chill. The loan agreement was real. She had typed it herself on Richard's old typewriter. But the paper? Had she grabbed a sheet from a later batch when she reprinted it for him to sign? "That's impossible," Catherine said. "They're claiming fraud." "Catherine, if they prove you forged the loan document to hide the assets, you go to jail, and Jenna gets everything." "I didn't forge it." "Then we need proof, indisputable proof. That Zurich document you keep talking about. Is it time?" Catherine closed her eyes. The Zurich document. It was the nuclear option. It wouldn't just win the case. It would destroy Richard's memory completely. It would reveal him not just as a moocher, but as a criminal. "Not yet," Catherine said. "Let them present their case. Let Jenna testify. Let her tell the world how honest and amazing Richard was. Let her build him up as a saint. And then, Catherine said, we show them the sinner." The trial of Miller versus. The estate of Pembroke began on a Tuesday. The courtroom was packed. Local media had picked up the story, the grieving widow versus the pregnant mistress, fighting over a $20 million fortune. It was daytime soap opera gold. Judge Stone presided with a stern expression, clearly unimpressed by the cameras allowed in the back of the room. Simon Callahan gave an opening statement that was pure theatre. He painted Jenna as a victim of a cold, loveless system, a woman who had given her youth to a man who promised her the world only to have it snatched away by a vindictive ex-wife. He spoke of the unborn child, the last living piece of Richard Pembroke, casting Jenna as a holy mother figure. David Reynolds was more subdued. He stuck to the facts. The marriage was legal. The assets were commingled, but originated from Catherine, and the will was a momentary lapse of judgment by a sick man written under duress. Jenna took the stand on the second day. She wore white. It was a calculated move. She looked innocent, fragile. Under Callahan's gentle questioning, she wept. She told stories of Richard's loneliness. She described their nights together, how he would cry in her arms about how misunderstood he was. He told me Catherine treated him like an employee. Jenna sniffled. He said she made him sign papers without reading them. He said he was afraid of her. Then it was David's turn to cross-examine. "Miss Miller," David began, adjusting his glasses. "You claim Mr. Pembroke was afraid of his wife?" "Yes, terrified. Yet he lived in the same house with her until the day he died. He ate dinner with her every Sunday. He went on vacations with her. It was for show, to protect his image." "I see. Let's talk about the image. You drive a Porsche 911, correct?" "Yes, Richard gave it to me." "And your apartment, the penthouse on 4th Avenue. Richard paid the rent. And your clothing, your jewelry, your vacations. He took care of me. So in the 5 years you were together, Richard spent approximately $3 million on you. Is that correct?" Jenna hesitated. I don't know the exact amount." "We do," David said, holding up a spreadsheet. $3,400,000. "Miss Miller, did you ever ask where that money came from?" "He was rich. He owned Pembroke Logistics." "Did he? Or was he the CEO of a company owned by a trust? I don't know the technicalities. Clearly. Now about this pregnancy." David paused. The room went silent. "You are claiming this child is Richard's?" "It is. We have submitted Exhibit D," David said, handing a folder to the judge. "Medical records from Dr. Evans. Richard Pembroke underwent a vasectomy in 2010. Subsequent annual tests confirmed 0 sperm count. The last test was 6 months ago." Jenna went pale. She looked at Callahan, who was furiously writing notes. He could have had it reversed," Jenna stammered. "He told me he did. He went to Mexico. There is no record of that, Miss Miller, and even if there were, we have the results of the paternity test you submitted to yesterday." Callahan stood up. "Objection. We haven't had time to review the results. They were emailed to your office this morning." "Mr. Callahan," Judge Stone said coolly. "Overruled. Mr. Reynolds, proceed." David opened the envelope. "The test compares the fetal DNA to Richard Pembroke's DNA obtained from the coroner. The probability of paternity is," David looked at the jury, 0%. The courtroom erupted. Jenna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It must be a mistake, she screamed. The lab made a mistake. The lab is state certified, David said calmly. Miss Miller, is there anyone else? Perhaps the personal trainer Richard paid for, or the pool boy at the complex he rented for you. You bastard, Jenna shrieked. She stood up, looking ready to lunge at David. He loved me. It doesn't matter. The will is still valid. He wanted me to have the money, regardless. Order! Judge Stone banged her gavel. Miss Miller, sit down or be held in contempt. Jenna collapsed into her chair, sobbing. But these weren't the pretty tears of the funeral. These were the ugly, desperate tears of a woman whose house of cards had just been blown down by a hurricane. The paternity revelation damaged Jenna's credibility, but Callahan wasn't beaten yet. He pivoted. The pregnancy is irrelevant, Callahan argued the next day. The issue is the will. Richard Pembroke wrote a will leaving his assets to Jenna Miller. Whether the child is his or not, his intent was clear. He wanted her to have the money. And then Callahan played his ace. He called an expert witness, Dr. Aris Thorne, a forensic document examiner. Dr. Thorne, Callahan asked, you examined the so-called loan agreement from 1998. The one Mrs. Pembroke claims proves Richard owed her the money. I did, Dr. Thorne said. He was a small, fussy man with thick glasses. And what did you find? I analyzed the ink and the paper. The paper contains a specific optical brightener, a chemical compound used to make paper look whiter. This specific compound was not introduced into commercial paper manufacturing until 2004. A murmur went through the crowd. Catherine stiffened. She looked at David. I told you I didn't forge it. So, Callahan continued smiling like a shark. It is physically impossible for this document to have been signed in 1998. That is correct, Dr. Thorne said. It is a modern recreation, a forgery. Callahan turned to the jury. There you have it. Mrs. Pembroke knew she would lose. She knew Richard loved Jenna. So she forged a document to claim the money was a loan. This is fraud, plain and simple. Not only should Jenna get the estate, but Mrs. Pembroke should be in jail. David Reynolds looked at Catherine. Catherine, is he right? Did you retype it? I might have, Catherine whispered, her face pale. The original was stained with coffee. Years ago. I retyped it and asked Richard to sign it again. I didn't think the date mattered as long as the signature was real. It matters, David hissed. In a court of law, backdating a document is fraud. You just handed them the case. Judge Stone looked at the defense table. Mr. Reynolds, do you have any cross-examination? David stood up slowly. He looked defeated. No questions, Your Honor. Then the defense rests. David looked at Catherine. We have to rest. If you testify, they'll destroy you on the forgery. Catherine took a deep breath. She reached into her bag. She pulled out the manila envelope she had been carrying since the funeral, the one with the Zurich document. No, Catherine said, standing up. The defense does not rest. I have one more piece of evidence. Catherine, don't, David warned. Whatever it is, if it's another document you recreated. It's not, Catherine said. It's the original, from the bank. She walked to the bench. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit Z into evidence, and I would like to testify. Callahan jumped up. Objection. This was not in discovery. It was found yesterday. Catherine lied smoothly. In a hidden safe I didn't have the combination to until now. Judge Stone looked at the envelope. I'll allow it. But make it quick, Mrs. Pembroke. Catherine took the stand. She didn't look like a defeated woman. She looked like a woman who was about to drop a bomb and didn't care who got caught in the blast. David guided her. Mrs. Pembroke, what is this document? This, Catherine said, holding up a heavy cream-colored document with a red wax seal. Is a deed of trust from the Banque Privée in Zurich, Switzerland, dated February 14th, 2001. And what does it say? It says, Catherine began, her voice steady, that the account holding $22 million, the account Richard used to fund his lifestyle, his business, and his mistress, is not a personal investment account. She looked directly at Jenna. It is a custodial account, held in the name of Richard Pembroke, trustee. Trustee for whom? David asked. Catherine paused. The silence was absolute. For the benefit of the victims of the 1998 pension fund collapse. The judge's eyes went wide. Callahan stopped writing. Richard didn't earn that money, Catherine said, her voice rising. He stole it in 1998 before I bailed him out. He was running a pension fund scam. He siphoned off millions before the fund collapsed. He hid it in Switzerland. He thought he got away with it. He spent the last 20 years slowly washing that dirty money back into the US, pretending he was a business genius. Objection, Callahan shouted. This is hearsay. This is slander against a dead man. It's in the document, Catherine shouted back, slamming the paper on the ledge. He listed the beneficiaries in case of his death to absolve his conscience. He knew if he died, the money had to go back to the people he hurt. He was terrified of hell, Mr. Callahan. More terrified of hell than he was of the feds. She turned to Jenna. You want his fortune, Jenna. You want the 20 million. It's there. But it's not his. It belongs to 300 retired teachers and firefighters in Ohio who lost their life savings because of the man you loved. If you win this lawsuit, if you take that money, you are stealing from them. Jenna stared at Catherine. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. So take it, Catherine challenged. Take the money. But know that the FBI will be knocking on your door 5 minutes after the transfer clears, because I'm sending this document to the Department of Justice the moment I step out of this courtroom. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of a library or an empty church. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a bomb having just been diffused with 1 second left on the clock. The rain outside had intensified, hammering against the high windows of the courtroom, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo the pounding hearts of everyone in the room. Judge Margaret Stone held the document Catherine had submitted, Defense Exhibit Z, in hands that were visibly careful. She treated the paper not as evidence, but as if it were radioactive material. She adjusted her spectacles, reading the dense German and French text, then the certified English translation attached to the back. She read it once. She paused, looked up at the ceiling as if asking for patience, and then read it a second time. Minutes ticked by. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine, waiting. Simon Callahan, usually a man of perpetual motion and nervous energy, was frozen. He stared at the document in the judge's hand, a bead of sweat tracing a slow path down his temple. Beside him, Jenna Miller shifted in her seat, her earlier defiance replaced by a dawning, confused terror. She didn't understand the legal nuances, but she understood the atmosphere. The air had shifted. She was no longer the predator. Finally, Judge Stone lowered the paper. She took off her glasses and placed them deliberately on the bench. She looked at Simon Callahan, her expression unreadable, which was worse than if she had been angry. "Mr. Callahan," the judge said, her voice dangerously calm, barely rising above the sound of the rain. "I want to be very clear about what I am holding. Are you aware of the provenance of this document?" Callahan stood up, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him. He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Your Honor, as I stated, this is the first time I am seeing this. My client and I were unaware of any Swiss accounts." "This is not just an account, Counselor," Judge Stone corrected him, her voice sharpening. "This is a deed of trust from the Banque Privée in Zurich, dated February 14th, 2001. It explicitly establishes a constructive trust over the entirety of the funds in question, the $22 million you have been fighting for with such vigor." She picked up the paper again, reading aloud, her voice ringing through the hall. "The capital held herein is acknowledged by the trustee Richard Pembroke to be the direct proceeds of the liquidation of the North Ohio Public Servants Pension Fund. These funds are held in custodial capacity for the sole purpose of eventual restitution to the defrauded parties." A gasp rippled through the gallery. The press, seated in the back row, began furiously typing on their laptops. Judge Stone looked over the rim of the paper, her eyes locking onto Jenna. "It goes on to admit to criminal fraud. It details the routing numbers used to siphon the money. It effectively confesses to a federal crime." She paused for effect. "If I were to grant your motion, Miss Miller, if I were to award this money to you, I would effectively be acting as an accessory to money laundering. I would be handing you the stolen retirement savings of teachers and firefighters." Jenna stood up, her legs shaking so violently she had to grip the table for support. Her face was a mask of shock. But he promised me," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I didn't steal it. He did. Why should I be punished? He wanted me to have a life. He wrote that note. He loved me." "He loved the cover you provided." Catherine spoke up from the witness stand. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Jenna's hysteria like a razor. Catherine looked at the younger woman, not with hate, but with a profound, weary pity. "You wanted his life, Jenna. You wanted to be Mrs. Pembroke. You wanted his secrets, his history, his soul. Well, this is it. This is who he was. He wasn't a titan of industry. He was a thief who spent 20 years terrified of his own shadow. You can't inherit the fruit of the poisonous tree without swallowing the poison." "You knew," Jenna screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Catherine. "You knew all along, and you let me fight for it. You let me humiliate myself." "I gave you a choice," Catherine replied steadily. "I told you to settle. I told you to walk away. But you were too greedy to listen. You thought you deserved his fortune. Well, congratulations. You're now the primary claimant on a horde of stolen evidence." Callahan grabbed Jenna's arm, pulling her down into her seat with force. He began whispering furiously in her ear, his face pale. "Shut up," he hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. "We need to get out of here, now." Jenna looked at him, then at the judge, and finally at the empty air where she imagined her future, the Aspen house, the shopping sprees, the validation dissolving into smoke. "Your Honor." Callahan addressed the bench, his voice shaking. "My client wishes to withdraw her petition." "Withdraw?" Judge Stone raised an eyebrow, a flicker of dark amusement crossing her face. "After dragging this family through the mud, after wasting the court's resources for months." "We withdraw with prejudice," Callahan said quickly, desperate to stop the bleeding. "We make no claim on the estate. We just want to leave." "Granted," Judge Stone said, slamming the gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the war. "Case dismissed, and Mr. Callahan, I am ordering the bailiff to secure this document. I will be forwarding the transcript of this trial, along with Defense Exhibit Z, to the District Attorney and the SEC. They may have questions regarding your client's knowledge of the deceased's financial activities." Jenna didn't wait for the bailiff to move. She grabbed her purse, her knuckles white, and practically ran out of the courtroom. Her stilettos clacked loudly on the linoleum, a chaotic, fleeing rhythm that marked her total defeat. She didn't look back. She just ran, escaping the truth she had fought so hard to uncover. An hour later, Catherine stood on the wide stone steps of the courthouse. The storm had finally broken. The heavy grey clouds were parting, revealing a sliver of pale, washed-out blue sky. The air smelled of wet pavement and ozone, the smell of a clean slate. David Reynolds stood beside her, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. He took a long drag, exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted away in the breeze. "You realize what you just did, right?" David asked, looking at her with a mixture of awe and horror. "You didn't just win the case, Catherine. You nuked the estate. The feds will be all over this by tomorrow morning. They'll seize everything. The house, the cars, the accounts, the logistics firm. It's all proceeds of crime. You'll be left with absolutely nothing." Catherine buttoned her trench coat against the chill. She watched the city traffic moving below, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. "I have my own trust, David," she said softly. "The one my father left me. It's not $20 million, but it's clean. It's enough for a small apartment. Maybe that condo in Florida I used to talk about. But the reputation," David pressed, shaking his head. "Richard's legacy. Everyone will know. The papers will have a field day. Pembroke Empire built on fraud. It will destroy the family name." Catherine turned to look at him. Her eyes were clear, the shadows that had haunted them for weeks finally gone. "Richard's name was a lie, David," she said firmly. "I spent 30 years protecting a ghost. I spent 30 years looking over my shoulder, flinching every time the phone rang late at night, wondering if it was the FBI or a loan shark. I lived in a golden cage built on other people's misery. Today I didn't just destroy the name. I opened the cage." She smiled then, and it was the first genuine, unburdened smile David had seen on her face in decades. It transformed her, making her look 10 years younger. "I'm free," she whispered. "Jenna wanted the fortune. She can chase the memory of it. She can explain to her friends why she almost stole from retired teachers. But me, I'm done with the lies." A black town car pulled up to the curb. Catherine walked down the steps, her head held high. She didn't look back at the courthouse, that fortress of judgment. She didn't look back toward the cemetery where her husband lay under a headstone that felt increasingly like a prop. As she got into the car, she thought about the document now in the hands of the authorities. The fortune was gone. The mansion would be sold at auction. The empire would be dismantled brick by brick to pay back the victims of a crime committed 20 years ago. And somewhere in a small town in Ohio, an elderly retired firefighter would get a letter in the mail, a check he never expected to see, a restitution he had given up on. It wasn't the happy ending Jenna Miller had dreamed of. It wasn't the triumphant retention of wealth David Reynolds had fought for. But for Catherine Pembroke, driving away with nothing but her integrity and a small suitcase, it was the only victory that mattered. She had lost the fortune, but she had finally found herself. And there you have it. The story of how a mistress thought she deserved a fortune, only to find out that the fortune was actually a curse. Jenna walked into that courtroom, thinking she was fighting a scorned wife, but she was actually fighting the truth. In the end, greed blinded her to the reality that not all that glitters is gold. Sometimes it's just evidence. Catherine walked away with nothing but her freedom, proving that peace of mind is the one asset you can't put a price tag on. What would you have done if you were Catherine? Would you have kept the secret and the money? Or would you have burned it all down to do the right thing? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and betrayal, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss our next real-life story. Thanks for watching.